Hello, this is Hart Hagen. I wanted to share with you today about biomass energy. The thing about biomass energy is that it's bad news. I'll share with you what it is. Basically, biomass energy is burning wood pellets. It can also refer to biofuels such as corn ethanol, which is about 10% of the gasoline that we get at the pump. But mainly today is about biomass in the form of wood pellets, where they go into a forest, typically they're clear cutting the forest and turning it into wood pellets, and then most of it gets shipped to Europe to burn. So let's talk about what it is, how it works, what are the proponents saying about it, and then what's the reality behind it. We will find that this is an extraction from our natural systems. It's just more of the same. It's more of the same pretending to be different. So let's go to this view right here. What I really wanted to do was something like this view right there. So before we get started, I just want to invite you to go to harthagen.net and check out my free webinars. Now let's go over here to this screen. Biomass energy is bad news for our forests. But first, what do our forests do if we allow them to grow? What are we losing when we lose a forest? How our forests drive every stage of our water cycles. So evaporation, condensation, cloud formation, and precipitation are four major stages of our water cycles that a fully functioning forest will drive if we allow them to. Evaporation, it's little known. The U.S. Forest Service says that a typical mid-size, full-grown tree will evaporate or transpire about 11,000 gallons per year, and that averages out to maybe anywhere between 25 and 50 gallons per day during the growing season. And that's just one tree. So they're causing a lot of water to evaporate. Secondly, our forests drive condensation. Condensation is made possible by condensation nuclei. Condensation nuclei just come from the leaves of the tree. Water vapor comes from the leaves of the tree, and then when the water vapor is emanating from those leaves, what also is emanating from those leaves is things like bacteria and volatile organic compounds, which cause condensation. They make condensation possible. So for example, with the bacteria, let's say this is one bacterium, which is maybe a micron, maybe 1/1,000,000th of a meter across. And then here is a water molecule, which is like 2 nanometers, 2 billionths of a meter. So this water molecule is about 1/500th the size of the bacterium. Those water molecules need to stick to something solid. So the trees emanate not only the water vapor, but the bacteria, which form the condensation nuclei, which make condensation possible. So trees and forests cause evaporation and they cause condensation. Therefore, number three, they cause cloud formation. And because rain comes from clouds, so when you have cloud formation, then you have precipitation. Forests drive all four aspects of our water cycles, and to some extent grasslands do the same, to some extent wetlands do the same, but forests especially, forests are where we get most of the raw material they call feedstocks for biomass energy, and forests are under assault because they have lots of biomass energy in them. And so, but evaporation, condensation, cloud formation, and precipitation are the four major stages of our water cycles that forests drive. And if you take away the forest, you take away the water cycle. So if you take away the forest, you take away the source of rain, which is a very important aspect of climate. What do our forests become as they interact with water? Drum roll, bam. These 9 things a forest becomes as it interacts with water. A forest becomes a sponge. So if you have here's a forest over here, here's a place that used to be a forest over here. Here's a forest, here's a not forest because we cut it down. And so the forest over here becomes a sponge that soaks up the rainfall and then holds on to that rainfall. Number 2, it becomes a filter. It becomes an air filter and a water filter. An air filter in that you have air blowing through the forest. The air has dust and particulate pollution in it. The forest serves to block and collect that dust and particulate pollution. Number 3, a forest becomes an air filter and also a water filter. The forest slows down that water. The same property of a forest that is a sponge in that it collects water when the rain falls. That water is then going very slowly through the forest, not only because the vegetation serves to slow down the progress of water, but also because the vegetation improves the soil. The soil itself acts like a sponge and a filter. Number 3, heat bank. A forest is a heat bank in that it holds a lot of water. Therefore, it makes this plate. Remember the forest and the not forest? The forest is a place that is slow to warm up and slow to cool down because of all the water in it, because water itself is slow to warm up and slow to cool down. A forest is also a cooler. Because of all the evaporation that is taking place. When we sweat or when we step out of a pool, it feels cold because evaporation is happening. And so the forest does the same thing. The forest causes a lot of evaporation and therefore has a cooling effect. The forest is also a humidifier because of all this water vapor that is coming out of the leaves. It is humidifying, thereby keeping the air fairly moist. It is also a canopy. It acts like an umbrella that protects the floor of the forest from the harsh rays of the sun and provides shade, and therefore another way in which a forest is a cooler. A forest is also a windbreak. In the same way that it's an air filter, it slows down the wind when the wind is coming through, thereby preventing too much drying to occur. And if there's a forest fire, the windbreak property of the forest keeps the wind from whipping up the flames at a higher level of intensity. A forest is number 8, a biotic pump. This is a theory that is very solid. It's not yet accepted by the mainstream of meteorology or climatology, but it is a solid theory developed by Anastasia Makareva and her late colleague Viktor Gorshkov. But the biotic pump simply means that a forest causes wind and draws moisture to itself. It brings in, if you have a large, contiguous, mature forest, then the condensation occurs. The condensation creates a vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. So that vacuum quality is always causing air and wind to flow toward the forest. And last, a forest is habitat. It's not only habitat for animals, but it's also habitat for fungi, for bacteria, for the smaller plants. It's habitat for the biologically diverse plant communities, and therefore it's habitat. Habitat means not to confuse you, but habitat means biomass in a very positive sense of the term, where biomass means two entirely different things. But if you have habitat means biological diversity, it means a large amount of living things in that place. So the purpose, what we've been talking about so far, is just here are the reasons why we want to preserve a forest. Here are the reasons we don't want to reduce a forest to carbon. You know, a forest is more than carbon. A forest is more than fuel. But there are some people who want to reduce a forest to fuel in their thinking and in their ideology and in their conception of what is going on here. So let's move on. Let's look at a study from the Southern Environmental Law Center. The reason Southern is a key term here, this refers to the southeastern United States. Southeastern United States has become a hotbed of biomass energy, and this is not a good thing. So the Southern Environmental Law Center says a new study confirms harmful impacts of biomass industry. In 2019, the Forest Service data shows that more than 6.6 million green tons of forest were cut for bioenergy or fuel wood in these areas. That's the equivalent of 71,000 acres of forest cut, with Enviva being a primary user of this wood. Enviva is one of the two main big companies that are involved in this, Enviva, and the other is Drax. Despite industry claims, most of the wood used to manufacture pellets was not waste wood or residues, like limbs, tops, scraps, or rotten trees. Instead, the vast majority of material harvested for these wood pellet facilities were trunks or boles. There's been a sharp increase in the number of pellet mills operating in the region in recent years. Currently, 23 active pellet export facilities operate in the South, with more than 11 facilities, with 11 more facilities being proposed, and they're shipping it across overseas to especially England. The Drax power plant used to be a major coal burning plant. Now they're burning our forest, and we'll see more about that in a minute. Where do the wood pellets go to be burned? Well, here is, this may or may not be the Drax power plant, but the headline here says UK to finish with coal power after 142 years. So they're celebrating the end of coal power, and they're calling it renewable energy, but they've substituted our forests for coal to power their electrical needs. And this is an article from the BBC from September of 2024. This is a picture of the Radcliffe-on-Soar power station, and it says the plant is due to shut down. The UK is about to stop producing any electricity from burning coal, ending its 142-year reliance on fossil fuel. The country's last coal power station at Radcliffe-on-Soar finishes operations on Monday. This is last year, Monday, after running since 1967. This marks a major milestone in the country's ambitions to reduce. So they're celebrating this all as a positive thing. This is ambitious. This is courageous. This is we're saying goodbye to coal and saying hello to clean, green, renewable energy. But biomass is not clean, it's not green, it's not renewable. This marks a major milestone in the country's ambitions to reduce its contribution to climate change. Coal is the dirtiest fossil fuel, producing the most greenhouse gases when burnt. That is not true. There is well, yeah, it's the dirtiest fossil fuel, but it's not dirtier than biomass energy. Wood pellets produce more carbon per unit of energy and more pollution per unit of energy. But the science around climate change was growing. It was clear that the world's greenhouse gas emissions needed to be reduced, and as the dirtiest fossil fuel, coal was a major target. The growth of renewables has been so successful that the target date for ending, so they say the growth of renewables as if it's renewable to burn our forests. So they just throw in these words. This is propaganda. This is language that is, the purpose of it is not to tell the truth. The purpose of it is to deceive you. The purpose is to get on board with an industrial agenda and a government agenda. The growth of renewables has been so successful that the target date for ending coal power was brought forward a year. On Monday, Radcliffe-on-Soar was set to close. Here's another headline from another news source, CNN. CNN says UK becomes the first major economy to stop burning coal for electricity, closing its last power plant. So they're just celebrating this, but they're telling a story that is not entirely true and is very false and misleading. Is it renewable to burn wood pellets? So here's a story from The Guardian. Biomass power station produced 4 times emissions of UK coal plants, says report. Drax received £22 billion in subsidies, despite being UK's largest emitter in 2023, though company rejects flawed research. So the company is saying the research is flawed, but the research says that Drax is the largest emitter in 2023. The emissions come from something that is supposed to be renewable, even though if you cut something down now and then burn it, yeah, there's a lot of carbon dioxide when you burn it now, but down the road, those trees, when they regrow, are going to reabsorb that carbon. It's like spending money now because you borrowed a bunch of money and then saying that what you're doing is somehow sustainable. So let's go on to the next thing. Frankie Mayo, an analyst at Ember, a climate think tank, said burning wood pellets can be as bad for the environment as coal. Supporting biomass with subsidies is a costly mistake. That's according to an analyst at a climate think tank named Frankie Mayo. What do climate scientists say about this? So this is the Woodwell Climate Research Center. I strongly recommend the Woodwell Climate Research Center. They are a very good source of information, and they're carbon-only people. So which I'm not. I'm not a carbon-only person. I believe that the climate is not just about carbon. They are carbon-only people, which adds to the credibility here, since they're not coming from my exact same perspective. They say, okay, so climate scientists warn, this is all from an article entitled Climate Scientists Warn Against Biomass as Clean Energy Solution. Experts from Woodwell Climate Research Center urge IRS and Treasury Department to adopt more rigorous guardrails regarding the use of wood for bioenergy in the agency's proposed guidance on clean energy tax credits. So a lot of the funding for these activities is administered by the IRS, which is part of the Treasury Department. And so that's why the IRS and Treasury Department come into play here. Increasing use of the Woodwell Climate Research Center says increasing use of wood for bioenergy would increase emissions rather than having the desired effect of decreasing emissions. It is also important to consider the many values of forests beyond climate mitigation, such as timber, biodiversity, water, and recreation. So let's talk about that just a minute. Forests have value in many ways. A forest, all those things that I named at first, the evaporation, condensation, cloud formation, precipitation, all those things that a forest becomes as it interacts with our water cycles. It's a sponge, it's a filter, it's a heat bank, it's many different things. And so we need to look at the value, quite apart from the value of a forest in absorbing carbon dioxide. So when the biomass is supposed to be clean, green, and renewable, and it's supposed to be clean, green, and renewable because of its ability to absorb carbon dioxide and then produce supposedly renewable energy. But the Woodwell Climate Research Center is saying it is important to consider many of the values of the forest. Before we cut down this forest, let's talk about what the forest is that is valuable beyond climate mitigation, such as timber, biodiversity, water, and recreation. They are not counting foregone removals of CO2 from the atmosphere due to the harvest of live trees and emissions from the decay of roots and unused logging residues left in the forest after harvest. Almost none of these emissions are included in the UK's National Greenhouse Gas Inventory. If they were, this would have added between 22 and 27% to the emissions from total UK electricity generation. What they're saying is these emissions, meaning you have, when you cut down a forest, for one thing, you are removing the capacity of that forest to absorb carbon dioxide. And also, which is to say that down the road, that forest, if you don't cut it down, it has increased capacity to absorb carbon dioxide. So we're going to ignore that in the carbon accounting. And they're saying that if you didn't ignore that, then the UK, when it burns our trees and forests and plants and calls it renewable energy, they would have to increase their estimation of the carbon footprint of that activity by 22 to 27%. Although the CO2 should eventually be absorbed, the elevated levels in the interim are likely to be incompatible with the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change's aim of peaking global emissions as soon as possible. So what they're saying here is that we're going to cut down these trees, we're going to dry it and put it into wood pellets, ship it all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, we're going to burn it like coal, and which results in a pulse of carbon dioxide now. And they're saying that is inconsistent with the aims of the Paris Agreement to cause carbon emissions to go down now instead of supposedly waiting 20, 30, 50 years while the forest regrows, supposedly, if in fact that forest regrows at the pace they expected it to. The countries producing and consuming the biomass are not the same. When importing countries replace fossil fuels with biomass for heat and power, the emissions totals fall immediately, but there is no automatic mechanism to ensure that the exporting countries reduce their emissions in other sectors to compensate for the loss of carbon, of sequestrated carbon. So, recap: biomass energy is bad news. It fails on its own terms. It does not lower carbon emissions. It requires cutting down trees on a massive scale. And many of the trees cut down come from old growth forests. That's something that we didn't get to in this time, but there's been good reporting done that shows that much of this biomass energy is coming from mature forests, especially in Vancouver, in British Columbia, and in Nova Scotia, places like that. Wherever trees are felled, it destroys the soil, the water cycles, and the habitat. This powerful industry is categorically harmful. Now, I know this is not very cheerful, but the first step toward a solution is to be aware of the real problem. And biomass energy is part of the problem. It's not part of the solution. I invite you to go to my free webinars at go to harthagen.net, check out my free webinars. Thank you so much for joining me, and come back again soon.